I remember coaching a woman years ago who said something that stuck with me ever since. She said, "I don't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I started auditioning for love instead of expecting it." And that hit me because so many amazing, smart, loving women fall into that same trap. They bend, shrink, over, give, stay silent, not because they don't have value, but because no one ever taught them how to protect it. This isn't about playing games. This is about not playing yourself. Today, I want to show you the 4 silent habits that quietly erode your value in a man's eyes. And more importantly, how to stop doing them so you can stand in your power, keep your dignity, and attract the kind of love that doesn't need convincing. There's a deeply ingrained belief, especially among women who lead with their hearts, that the more you give, the more you prove your love, and the more likely you are to be loved in return. But let's be clear, love doesn't grow through overextension. It grows through mutual investment. When you constantly give your time, your emotional labor, your energy before it's been earned or reciprocated, it's not love. It's an unconscious attempt to trade effort for worth. I've seen this play out again and again. I once watched a woman in my circle burn herself out trying to keep a man interested. She brought him home-cooked meals after work, planned elaborate dates, sent long, thoughtful texts. Meanwhile, he barely replied, showed up late, and made excuses. She called it being loving. I called it emotional self-abandonment. And I get it. It's easy to fall into this pattern. Early in my own life, I believed that being valuable meant being indispensable to others. I stretched myself thin for people who hadn't earned my loyalty because I feared that if I stopped giving, they'd stop choosing me. What I didn't understand then is that genuine connection can't be forced by effort alone. The cost of overgiving isn't just emotional exhaustion. It's the quiet erosion of self-respect. When someone doesn't have to rise to meet your energy, they lose respect for it. They may enjoy it, even take advantage of it, but they won't value it. And in relationships, value is everything. You can't create wealth in love by spending all your emotional capital on someone who's not even investing. The most powerful shift happens when you stop proving your worth and start protecting it. One of the most common traps we fall into, especially when we see potential when someone is chasing connection, we mistake the early spark, the laughter, the shared interests as evidence that something meaningful must grow from it. And so we lean in. We text first, we rearrange plans, we forgive inconsistencies, we initiate the next date, we begin managing the connection like it's our responsibility to keep the flame alive. But the truth is, when you're the one constantly reaching out, you're not building intimacy, you're compensating for his lack of effort. When I was younger, I once found myself in a relationship where I was always initiating everything. I thought I was being proactive, romantic even. But looking back, I wasn't being strong, I was being anxious. I wasn't observing his effort, I was filling the gaps with mine. And every time I did, I made it easier for him not to show up. We have to understand that true wealth, emotional or otherwise, is never built on desperation. It's built on discernment. You don't invest in a business because you're lonely. You invest because it has structure, consistency, and value. Relationships are no different. The moment you find yourself chasing is the moment you need to stop and observe. Is he meeting you halfway? Is he making time, putting in effort, showing you he wants to build something real? Chasing comes from fear. Observation comes from strength. And strength is what draws in the right kind of man, the kind who values your presence because he sees you're not giving it away for free. Your energy is a currency. Spend it where there's return. Disrespect isn't always loud. It doesn't always arrive as cruelty or overt betrayal. More often, it shows up in small, quiet ways. So quiet, in fact, that you might miss it until it's already undermined the entire foundation. A missed call with no apology. A sarcastic remark that hits a little too hard. A conversation where you're talked over, or worse, barely heard. And because it doesn't look aggressive, You excuse it. You rationalize it. You tell yourself you're being too sensitive or that he didn't mean it that way. But the most dangerous kind of disrespect isn't the kind that slams door sits, the kind that leaves them slightly ajar while you keep hoping they'll fully open. I remember a relationship where I kept ignoring these subtle signs. She was kind, but dismissive, polite, but absent, always somewhere else emotionally. And every time I brought it up, I felt like I was overreacting, like I should just be grateful for what I was getting. But with every moment I let slide, I sent a message. This is okay. And over time, I didn't just lose connection with her, I lost part of myself for tolerating so little. The truth is, you train people how to treat you. Every time you stay silent in the face of subtle disregard, you teach them that your peace is negotiable, that your feelings are optional. And once someone knows they can dishonor your boundaries without consequence, they will. Not always maliciously, but habitually, comfortably. The wealth of a relationship lies in mutual respect, and when you ignore the whispers of disrespect, you bankrupt that potential before it ever matures. Never mistake being tolerant for being wise. Wisdom knows when silence becomes self-betrayal. There's this belief that being easygoing, low maintenance, or chill is what makes someone more attractive. That the less you ask for, the more likely you are to be chosen. But let me tell you, low standards aren't appealing. They're not a sign of emotional maturity. They're a sign you've stopped expecting more, often because deep down you fear you can't get it. I remember speaking to a client brilliant, successful, warm-hearted, who kept tolerating men who gave her the bare minimum. Last-minute plans, inconsistent texts, emotional distance. She'd laugh it off, try not to seem needy, and say things like, "I'm just going with the flow." But she wasn't flowing. She was drowning in her own unmet needs, and I've lived it too. There were times in my own life I confused being laid back with being spineless. I let people treat me as an option because I thought if I didn't make waves, they'd stick around. What I learned painfully is that people don't respect what's too easy to get. They respect what's clear, what's earned, what has standards. You see, standards aren't about being demanding. They're about signaling value. In economics, anything that comes too cheap is perceived as disposable. The same is true in love. When someone sees you accepting late replies, broken promises, or vague intentions, they don't think, "What a relaxed partner." They think, "I don't have to try." But when you draw a linen knot rudely, not dramatically, but with quiet strength, you instantly change the equation. Suddenly, your presence isn't a given, it's a privilege. And people rise or they leave. Either way, you win. Because a relationship that survives only by you lowering your standards isn't a relationship, it's a transaction. And transactions don't build wealth. Investments do. Raise the bar, or you'll keep settling for what never required one. At the beginning of a relationship, you're often at your best. You have a rhythm, a structure, a life. You're showing up for your goals, maintaining your friendships, staying grounded in who you are. And that's exactly what makes you attractive, your fullness, your self-sufficiency, your energy. But then something subtle begins to shift. You skip a workout here, cancel on a friend there. You stop reading, stop creating, stop doing the things that made you feel alive because now you're prioritizing us over me. It doesn't happen all at once. That's the danger of it. It's gradual. And it wears the mask of love. You think you're making sacrifices for connection, but what you're really doing is slowly trading your identity in the hope that the relationship will feel more secure. And yet, the more you give up, the more you fade. The very spark that drew him in begins to dim. I've seen this pattern unfold in people close to me. Talented, passionate women who were vibrant in their independence suddenly become shadows of themselves. They forgot what lit them up. I once did this too. I sacrificed parts of my ambition, my time, even my creativity to be what I thought someone wanted, and ended up resenting both of us for it. Not because they asked me to, but because I gave it up without question. If you give away your sense of self for the illusion of closeness, You're not building a relationship, you're building dependency. True intimacy doesn't require your surrender, it requires your wholeness. A man doesn't fall in love with a woman who becomes his world. He falls in love with a woman who has one of her own. The most attractive thing you can bring to a relationship is the life you're unwilling to abandon. There's something deeply destructive about the compulsion to prove yourself to be loved. It begins quietly, a little extra effort here, a self-sacrifice there. You answer texts faster than he does. You suggest all the plans. You try harder, care more, do more. Not because he asked you to, but because deep down you believe that if you just do enough, give enough, love enough, he'll finally see your worth. But here's the truth. Proving your value is the fastest way to bury it. You're not a pitch to be sold. You're not an audition waiting to be cast. You don't increase your worth by being more convenient, more available, more flexible. That's not love. That's performance. And no man is drawn to a performance for long because eventually the mask exhausts you and the dynamic becomes transactional. I remember being in a situation where I felt like I constantly had to justify why I was worth staying for. I bent over backwards, adapted myself endlessly, took responsibility for the emotional weight of the relationship, and it drained me. It didn't bring us closer. It made me invisible. Not because I lacked value, but because I kept trying to prove it rather than simply be it. Value doesn't need to shout. It doesn't chase. It doesn't explain itself 100 times hoping someone finally understands. It just is. And when someone is ready, they'll recognize it not because you contorted yourself into their ideal, but because you stood firmly in who you are. Real value is not something you show, it's something you hold quietly, confidently, without apology. When you stop performing for love, you start attracting those who don't need a show to see your worth. Emotional generosity is beautiful. The ability to love, to care deeply, to give without keeping score. It's one of the most powerful qualities a person can possess. But without standards, that same generosity becomes dangerous. It shifts from love to self-abandonment. You start giving to people who haven't earned it, who don't reciprocate, who take your kindness as permission to stop trying. And over time, the very thing you thought would create connection becomes the reason you feel invisible. I've watched this unfold in women who would do anything for the men they loved. Thoughtful messages, unconditional support, forgiveness on repeat. And I've asked them, what has he done to earn that level of devotion? Often, the answer is silence. Because somewhere along the way, they believed that love is shown by how much you're willing to give, not by how clearly you define what you will and won't accept. I've done it too. I've poured myself into people emotionally because I thought that if I just gave enough, they'd finally see me, finally choose me. But people don't respect what you give away freely without boundaries. They respect what they have to show up for. And when someone receives your best without effort, they don't feel inspired, they feel entitled. Generosity without discernment is a transaction with no return. It depletes you, it erodes your confidence, and it teaches others that your emotional labor doesn't require commitment, it's just available. That isn't love. That's a slow erosion of self-worth disguised as kindness. The richest relationships are not built on how much you give, they're built on what you require while you give. Because without standards, even the purest love loses its value. Silence is often mistaken for strength. We convince ourselves that not reacting, not speaking up, not causing tension is a sign of maturity. But in relationships, silence is never neutral. It's always communicating something. The question is, what is it saying about you? When you stay quiet after a broken promise, when you downplay your feelings to avoid seeming too much, when you let dismissive behavior slide because you don't want to be seen as difficult, you're sending a message not to him, but to yourself and to the relationship. You're saying, this is okay. I'll tolerate this. And people will always take note of what you allow. I've made this mistake. There was a time I convinced myself that not addressing small issues was how I kept peace. But all I really did was teach others how to ignore me. And the longer I kept silent, the harder it became to speak. Until eventually, I was more invested in keeping things calm than keeping them honest. That wasn't strength. That was fear wrapped in politeness. I've seen this pattern repeat in people who thought they were being loving by letting things go. But love without voice is compliance. It breeds resentment, not respect. Because when your silence becomes habitual, it's no longer just about one moment it becomes the standard. Think of it like investing in a company. If you never speak up when they deliver poor returns, you're not a shareholder, you're a silent donor, and no wealth is built that way. The same goes for your emotional investments. If your silence is protecting peace, that's wise. But if it's avoiding discomfort at the cost of your dignity, that's self-betrayal. Every time you choose not to speak your truth, you're still sending a message. Make sure it's one that honors your value. There's a dangerous lie we absorb early on the idea that a relationship will complete us. That somewhere out there is the missing piece. And once we find it, everything inside us will settle. It's romantic in theory, but in practice, it's a trap. Because if you believe someone else is the key to your wholeness, you will always approach love from a place of lack. You will mold yourself to fit, chase validation, and accept scraps, all because you think you need them to feel enough. A relationship is not the destination. It's not the finish line that makes your life meaningful. It's an enhancement, not a rescue. And if you approach it with emptiness, you will drain it trying to fill a void it was never meant to occupy. I've lived this in my own life. In my 20s, I believed that if I could just find the right partner, everything else, my insecurities, my doubts, my inner chaos would calm down. But all I did was bring that chaos into the relationship. Because when you lean on someone to complete you, you hand them responsibility for your happiness, and that's too much weight for anyone to carry. I've also seen people, women especially, who abandon their pursuits, friendships, and routines the moment a relationship begins. They merge lives so quickly that they forget the importance of still having one of their own. But the truth is, what makes a relationship strong is when two whole people choose to build together, not because they're incomplete, but because they're already rich in purpose. You are not half of anything. You are not waiting to be finished. Your value was never in what someone else brought into your life, it's in what you bring into theirs. You don't need someone to complete you. You need someone who celebrates that you're already complete. There's a pattern many fall into without even realizing it, trying to convince someone to love them. It starts subtly. You highlight your best traits, minimize your needs, tolerate behaviors you would have once called out, all in the name of being understanding. You send the long messages. You initiate the conversations. You try to make them see what a good partner you'd be. But let's be brutally honest, if someone has to be persuaded to value you, they never truly did. Love is not built on convincing. It's built on recognition. The right person doesn't need a presentation, a sales pitch, or constant reminders of your worth. They feel it. They show up not perfectly, but consistently. Not with excuses, but with effort. They don't need you to chase, to beg, to shrink. They just want to meet you where you already stand. In my own life, I've experienced both sides of this dynamic. I've been the one chasing, hoping that if I just said the right thing or showed enough patience, she'd finally realize. But what I realized instead is this: people know what they want. And if they're not choosing you, it's not because you didn't try hard enough. It's because they aren't ready or willing. And that's not something you can fix. I've also seen what it's like when someone truly sees you. No games, no mixed signals, just clarity. That kind of connection doesn't leave you feeling anxious. It leaves you feeling calm. There's no proving, only showing up. And when it's mutual, it feels like alignment, not a performance. Relationships that endure are not the result of relentless effort, they're the result of shared energy. A man who's right for you will make it clear, not with words, but with actions. Not once, but consistently. You won't have to beg the right man to show up, he'll be too busy proving he wants to stay. So here's what I want you to take with you. Your value isn't something you earn in a relationship, it's something you own before it ever begins. The right man doesn't fall in love because you overgive, chase, or shrink yourself to fit his world. He falls in love because you've built a life, a mindset, and a standard that says, I know who I am, and I won't trade that for temporary attention. You don't build emotional wealth by being everything to someone else. You build it by protecting your time, your energy, your standards, and only offering your love to someone who's shown they know what to do with it. Love without boundaries isn't generosity, it's self-neglect. And relationships that start with self-abandonment always end in disappointment. So stop waiting to be chosen. Choose yourself every day. Be open, be kind, be real, but never confuse effort with worth, and never confuse silence with peace. The moment you decide that your identity, your joy, your self-respect are non-negotiable, everything changes. The wrong men fall away, the right one steps forward. Not because you chased him, but because you finally stopped chasing and stood still long enough to be seen.